Hello, everyone. It's good to have a chance to speak with you again. My name is Ben Perrin. I am the Director of Disaster Response for the Central State Synod. And today I want to continue the conversation that we've been having over the last several weeks, just laying a groundwork about what is disaster work and what does that look like within the Central State Synod. Today we're going to look at some of the disaster structure and the systems that come with doing work within the disaster field. When you first start looking at disaster, it's important to look at the stages of disaster. And so before an event happens, you have your preparedness, your preparation that's happening, and that's happening on a individual, family, school, church, business level. And so that's happening at all kinds of different places. Preparedness actions are happening with your local, state, and federal government to make sure that things are in place and ready to go when a disaster happens. In both Kansas and Missouri, we are not strangers to disasters, and so we have to be more prepared than other places of the country, as we live in areas that are prone to becoming prone to the different types of disasters. So you have your preparedness that's happening, and then an event happens. As soon as that event happens, you go into the next phase of the disaster, which is your response phase. During this phase, that's when your first responders are participating, trying to make things safe within the community, trying to do rescues and make sure that people are at places where they are safe and trying to account for the damage that has happened. Also within this time, you have organizations that are doing mass feeding and sheltering and distributing supplies to people that have been impacted by the disasters. And all of this is as a goal of getting things to a place where the immediate impact of the disaster can settle down, and then you can begin to work towards recovery. The next phase is, like I said, the recovery phase, which is a longer phase and can take quite some time as you're going through this cycle. But through that, we're restoring and developing and revitalizing the communities and individuals impacted by disaster. Within the recovery phase, that's when we go in and help to rebuild homes, help to get people back on their feet so that the community is in a place where they can move forward. And part of that moving forward process is the mitigation process, where we learn from what has happened in previous disasters, and we do all that we can to make sure that we're in a better place for if a disaster happens again. An example of that is, fortifying bridges or rebuilding homes to a place where they're out of the floodplain, where they wouldn't be impacted by flooding again, those kind of things. And so each one of those phases is very important. And each one of those phases, Lutheran Disaster Response participates within Missouri and Kansas. The work within mitigation happens more on a government level, whether that's local, state, or federal. But we participate in that work as a partner, bringing forward the needs that may exist from individuals who were previously impacted by disasters, and so that we can make as positive of an impact as possible when the next disaster happens. With disaster, you have different systems in which it works. There's a lot of organizations, a lot of people that are participating in the work. And so in order for that to happen and happen in a way where people are able to be helped, also where people are able to be gaining access to resources, but not gaining, multiple of the same resources, that communication is vital. And so that happens with the federal, state, and local government organizations working alongside voluntary organizations such as Lutheran Disaster Response to ensure that communication is happening, to ensure that the people that are supposed to be doing whatever that next thing is within the disaster cycle, to make sure that work is happening and happening well. In disaster, we talk about disasters beginning and ending locally, and the local involvement within all the phases of disaster is where the success of disaster work happens. And with the disasters, the larger the disaster, the more that people will come in to the area and they will participate, but it's the folks that are actually living in the community that really can help ride the recovery process all the way to the end to ensure that their community is ready to move forward together. Some of the systems that we have in place that both in Missouri and Kansas that we lean into and are members of and participate in would be with the National VOAD, which is the Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. Lutheran Disaster Response is a member of the National VOAD, and as a result of that, Central State Synod is affiliated with Lutheran Disaster Response, and we're the representative of Lutheran Disaster Response, so therefore we're connected in with the National VOAD network. On the next level down, you have the state VOADs, where there's a state VOAD in both Missouri and Kansas, and those are the coordinating bodies within the states, where the organizations such as ourselves or the Red Cross or Salvation Army or Catholic Charities or countless other folks are participating on a statewide basis to ensure that people are being helped, that we're prepared as a disaster group to respond and help with recovery when needed. On the local level, you have your community organizations active in disaster, which are COADs. Those COADs are built up of the voluntary organizations that I mentioned before, plus it can be involving with local government, with schools, with businesses, whoever the key players are within a community that can make an impact before, during, and after a disaster. And once a disaster's happened, long-term recovery groups are established, and those long-term recovery groups are the place within the structure that help get the resources to the people, whether that's through disaster case management or some other system set up through the long-term recovery group. These groups are often groups that are subsets or committees of COADs, but they don't have to be. They can be a standalone organization comprised of different groups within the community that are there to help with the recovery, to ensure that the local voice is heard and the local voice is driving that process to recovery. In the Central State Synod, we have lots of different types of disasters. Flooding is definitely our most, as of recently, seems to be our most common disaster, and those are disasters that span throughout both the states. They're widespread events that have major impact. Other disasters that we see severe thunderstorms, which are, can lead to tornadoes and straight line winds that obviously have a large impact on the communities that we serve, the people that are impacted. There's a lot of damage that can come from those storms. Other disasters that happen are, drought, which can lead to wildfires. We experience winter weather, ice storms, blizzards. We see civil unrest, as you look back on Ferguson and the impact that had in the city of St. Louis, or the overall St. Louis area. And then the disaster that we're currently living through right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. All of those are very real possibilities of disasters that happen. And then the last one here, earthquakes, might seem as a surprise, but we live the eastern part of Missouri runs along the New Madrid Fault, and we're constantly preparing and making plans and participating with the state and federal government for what those plans should look like if and when the New Madrid Fault goes off again. When a disaster happens, there's declarations that can happen. Where we live, as a result of large portions of both Kansas and Missouri being rural, much of our disasters go as the first thing as undeclared disasters. So those are disasters where the community is left to utilize its resources and its people to make a recovery as best as they can with the resources that they have. The next step up is the state declaration, which is a declaration that's made by the governor, and that can open up some more of the resources that are needed that are available through the state's resources. And the bigger one is the federal declaration, which is when the president makes a declaration and FEMA gets involved, and that opens up a wide variety of resources to people and businesses. And so within that federal declaration of disasters, there's public assistance disasters, which is dealing with infrastructure and businesses, and more so the overall impact of the state, as opposed to the individual assistance declarations, which is the impact to individuals and households. Public assistance declarations seem to be more common, as there needs to be more help with getting infrastructure back in place. And often, like I said, in our areas where we have our disasters, in our rural setting, there is not often enough of the numbers to meet the threshold to get the individual assistance declaration. There's also a third type of declaration, which is an SBA declaration, which is the Small Business Administration. And that declaration is important too, because it's the only way that the federal government can provide loans to individuals to help with recovering from a disaster. And so that's a resource that individuals can tap into if an SBA declaration has happened, even if an individual assistance declaration has not happened. Over the last several years, we've had quite a few individual assistance declarations that have come in both Missouri and Kansas, much of which has been flooding related, whether that was the flooding at Christmas time in 2015 in Missouri, or the flooding in 2017 in Missouri as well. Both of those disasters impacted the vast majority of the southern portion of the state of Missouri. More recently, we had the multiple flooding events in 2019 that spanned throughout Kansas and Missouri, and had long-lasting impact in different areas of both those states. And then, like I said, right now we have the COVID-19 disaster that every state and territory in the United States was awarded a declaration for that. And so it shows you that there's a lot that's happening, and it's constantly happening within our state. That's why it's important that we as a Synod have a plan and have a way for congregations to tie in and become a part of that process within their local community and throughout the Synod as a whole. And next week, our video will talk about a little bit what that plan could look like as we look at establishing conference disaster teams. And as always, would love to hear your feedback, or would love to hear from you if you want to reach out to me at my email address, which is bperrin, P-E-R-R-I-N, at css-elca.org. and well, I would love to get together and talk with you some more. So look forward to talking with you next week, and hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.